the first strike in Desert Storm, you'll plan your mission, and you'll know exactly what your targets are. You'd likely have good photographs of the target area you're going into. You get an intelligence brief. You'll finish your mission planning, and you'll step to the aircraft to do your pre-flight. Somewhere from the initial point inbound, you'll acquire the target through the various kinds of sensing devices you have on the aircraft, and then target it. Fly over the target, release your weapons, and track those weapons into the target, and then go out through any escape route that you'd planned. During that period of time, the high-intensity portion of the mission obviously is going to be from the time that you cross what we call the forward edge of the battle area. And that's actually crossing the border into Iraq in this case.
Gary, I've never flown a combat mission, but as far as the training goes, I can remember in my days in Apollo, we spent thousands of hours in the simulator, and it was very realistic training, and when we got to the actual landing on the moon, it was exactly like the simulator.
We do train at very high levels of well, let's say, interest. And when you go out to places like Red Flag and you've trained in the environment that we train in, you have high-intensity dogfights. You have to fight your way in and fight your way out of the target. So the type of training we do on a day-to-day basis is real world. And so when you get into the combat arena, of course, your blood pressure's up and your adrenaline's pumping pretty good, but it's not that much different than it would be in day-to-day.
I can remember in Apollo days when in the simulator in the training, they wanted to get you so well prepared. We had so many failures and so many malfunctions and so many emergencies going down to the moon. The thing was just sort of hanging together with baling wire. And when we got to the real flight, none of that happened. It all worked great, and we just went right in and had no problem at all. So it was sort of a piece of cake on the real flight. I'm sure with people shooting at you, though, and the real bullets coming at, it sure gets your adrenaline pumping different than a training exercise.
Well, let's just say we have these things called Smoky Sams that are just basically bottle rockets we use at the range to simulate surface-to-air missiles. And watching a bottle rocket come up is certainly different than watching a SAM come off a rail.
stealth means non-radar observable. In other words, that we're trying to make this fighter was made to try to make it invisible to the enemy radar. And that's why the strange shapes. Most of our modern fighter aircraft are made with sleek, rounded curves so it'll go real fast and be highly maneuverable. And yet this has got a bunch of strange angles and wedges and flat plates, which are all well engineered in a concise design so that it'll be invisible to the enemy radar.
If you look at the airplane with those plates, you can see how the radar energy would be deflected at an angle away from the radar dish that's putting out the energy so that you don't get the return to the radar dish as talked about earlier. You'd think that that would make it supersonic with that swept wing look and everything, and it really doesn't.
Yeah, it's as you see, it's a subsonic aircraft, and it's designed for night attack, so you'll hopefully never see this thing in what as us as fighter pilots call a typical dogfight. The engines and all of the fuel are buried within the main body of the aircraft, and also all the weapon systems, and it can carry all of the latest of the smart weapons, the laser-guided bombs, such things as that. There's probably a pretty good workload, don't you think? It's a single crew, one pilot in this thing with all of these modern bells and whistles that they got in there. What do you think as a fighter pilot? Well,
as workload is relative to the amount of technology that's in the airplane. And having not flown this airplane, I can't say, but based upon my experience, as the workload is offset by technology to some degree, but I can bet as you're coming in toward the target and highlighting your target with a laser rangefinder that you've got your hands full.
I think it'd be a dream to fly.
Well, that Klingon cloaking device that he uses is really interesting, and Lockheed is where I'd expect it to come from Skunk Works. They've done a lot of things and built unique airplanes. As a unique airplane, you're stealing in, meaning that that the radar pulses will bounce at angles off of the various plates on the aircraft, so that it's not received by the radar transmitter. Therefore, there's no picture. It's kind of interesting to me. They've got a flight control system that's completely computer controlled, very much like the other aspects of the aircraft.
It was amazing how they were able to keep this airplane out of the public eye for so many years and actually have an operational squadron without anybody knowing about it. But that's the whole purpose of stealth, I guess, huh?
Well, we kept it a stealth secret, all right. It was, I say we, the United States, most of us in the United States, including the United States Air Force, were only, if they were similarly somewhat aware of it, they were only somewhat aware of it. They'd never seen one, never knew what it was doing.
Well, what I've read, I see the touchdown is about 150 knots, and the drag chute is basically used to save the brakes on the thing, because they've got some very high-tech brakes on it.
Charlie, I understand that the F-117, it was actually the first strike aircraft in Desert Storm.
I would imagine so. It was designed to night attack, sneak in invisibly to the enemy radar, and then hit these strategic targets like command and control centers and radar sites and stuff like that. You know, I flew in the old days the F-102, the first of the Delta Wing airplanes, and this has a real similar shape of a Delta Wing, which if you take the fuselage away and just look at the wing, it's sort of like a boomerang. And basically that's what a Delta Wing shape is.
The Delta Wing airplane is the type of airplane I'd like to fly, because it does those things that you'd like to have do at very low speeds.
Yeah.
And you find yourself in that position once in a while in a dogfight where you'd like to have something that'll really turn at slow speed. But this airplane obviously is not set up for dogfighting. Its task is to go in at night unobserved, and that it does it better than obviously any airplane in the world today. Strike Eagle is, of course, taking a major role in Desert Storm.
It's a tremendous airplane. I've had a chance to fly in the back seat of a F-15B, which is a two-seater air-to-air version, Gary. And it's a tremendous airplane. Puts a old guy like me to sleep in a hurry at 9 Gs, I'll tell you.
The one thing it does better than any airplane in the world is to be able to look out there and see the other aircraft and master the other aircraft beyond visual range, meaning they can go out and track more targets and destroy more targets before they get to what we call the merge, before you get to into the dogfight mode of operation. So it's a fine airplane.
This airplane has a 9G capability, which means you can put 9 times the weight of the aircraft as you maneuver in a dogfight. That also means your body's experiencing 9 times the weight that you normally have down here on Earth, which is 1G. When I was sitting in the back seat of the F-15B and we were in a simulated dogfight with the F-16s, that G level was really a rapid onset.
In a dogfight, the aircraft that can turn the better of the two is the one that's going to win the fight.
Right.
So if you out-turn the other guy, it means you have to put more force on your aircraft to be able to get around and turn behind him, so you can bring your weapons to bear on him. We call it the big tennis court because it's got such a large surface area that when it turns, when the aircraft turns and you start into a dogfight with an F-15, what you see is that big slab on the top of the aircraft with between these two goalposts or type of thing. And so it's easy to see the F-15 and identify the F-15 as opposed to some of the others.
I can remember years ago when this aircraft was being produced and the first models were rolling off the assembly line at McDonnell Douglas. I was up there at the factory and was given a tour, and I remember standing above on a platform looking down at this airplane, and I couldn't believe for a fighter aircraft the size of this airplane. You know, the wingspan was over 40 feet, the length of it was 60-something feet.
Those big twin tails.
And the big twin tails, and the speed brake on this airplane is up between the tails on the top of the fuselage. And I looked at the speed brake, which was deployed, and to me it was bigger than the wing of the F-86 that I flew 15 years before that. It was just an impressive airplane.
Well, it's got that size of the airplane lets it have a large radar dish, which gives us the capability to look far out and see small targets. When we developed this airplane, we were thinking about cruise missiles, detection, and other sorts of things, and this airplane, therefore, can do a lot of that. It also has because of the size of the airplane, allows it to carry a lot of, quite a number of weapons, particularly in the Strike Eagle size. That was one of the advantages that McDonnell Douglas had when they competed for the Strike Eagle. It was a large airplane, therefore it could carry quite a number of weapons.
Unlike the F-17, this thing's got a lot of external stores on it, which means the fuel tanks, the missiles, and the armaments all carried outside on the wings or underneath the belly of the airplane. And of course, it reflects radar pretty well.
An airplane like the F-15 is just a tremendous machine. You can do both the long-range fight and also the short-range fight and win in both. But it's that type of airplane. And the pilots that fly the F-15 are the highest trained pilots, fighter pilots, to date.
Well, the A's and the C's, the single-seaters of this aircraft, of course, being used in the Desert Storm as combat air patrol cap. They go in and they'll monitor and just fly and loiter, waiting for a chance to shoot down an Iraqi airplane if one of them is dumb enough to launch into that environment over there.
The F-15 is doing more than holding its own. It will dominate the skies over there as far as air-to-air. F-16, looking at it, is beautiful just in the air, is beautiful on the ground. It's the world's prettiest fighter. It certainly is the airplane that you strap on rather than fly.
Right.
It's a pint-sized airplane. It's only half the size of the F-15, but carries as many bombs as the F-15.
Gary, what do you think the F-16 is doing mission-wise over there these days?
We're carrying both the night mission and the day mission. The F-16C models with Lantern, low-altitude night infrared navigation pods, are going in at night, I'm sure, to do the night strike with the precision weapons. The C models and the A models basically bombing the Republican Guard positions, trying to soften up the ground forces.
You can see it pulling here, probably a 9G turn right there. Seems like it can turn on a dime.
It can, and you can see that it can sustain that 9G turn for quite some time.
And even accelerate, right, in a high G turn like that, which is really phenomenal.
From this picture, you can see the aircraft in its low-altitude environment. It's a great low-altitude aircraft. You can fly it at 100 feet above the ground at 540 knots and feel very stable because of the fly-by-wire flight control system. Now, that fly-by-wire system was new to the F-16. It basically has a joystick, like a computer joystick for your video game, that sends electrical signals back to the flight controls through a series of 4 computers. And 4 computers run in parallel on vote, and basically allow you to fly it.
So if 3 computers say pitch up and the other one says pitch down, it votes it out,
That's right?
The system votes it out.
So it's as they say in the trade, redundant.
Right. our pilots have gone through this very realistic simulated combat training called Red Flag. It's you fight against an aggressor force, and you fight against in a desert scenario. So our training has really been very realistic for what we're seeing over there in Desert Storm now.
That's right on. Particularly the threats, you see a missile coming up here, that's what we call a Smoky Sam. That Smoky Sam gives us the simulation, allows us to do the avoidance, and we call puking flares out, or putting flares out of the aircraft to avoid any infrared tracking that might be going on.
Those are high heat flares that we saw flashing out there, and those things are to deflect and confuse a heat seeker missile, right?
That's correct.
And we're looking through the heads-up display here, right?
That's correct. What we have here is a strafing pass, and you can see the gun being pulled and the 20-millimeter shells hitting the target. Now, what we're seeing here is the configuration of the radar and the weapon system. You can see from this picture it can carry up to 12 500-pound bombs.
Wow.
It delivers those with pinpoint accuracy. See, he's turning inside the circle of the F-4, maintaining a good gun picture the whole time. What you see through the heads-up display is the gun sight. And that little pipper that was on that other target means the bullets would be going right through that other airplane. Now that hands-on dogfight switch allows the airplane to go from an air-to-surface mode immediately to an air-to-air mode.
There's an AIM-120 going off. That's the AMRAAM, right?
That's correct.
That advanced medium-range air-to-air missile.
Now you're back in the air-to-mud region, we call it. This is a infrared picture of night activities. You can see the vision is not exactly a visual picture, but more one of infrared picture. Now, they're flying through clouds here, and that's a real picture, so they want to be able to see through that, so they'll turn the radar on. Now, that's a night picture. That's in the dark of night. You can see a tank through that infrared system. Now you see the aircraft in its air-to-surface mode, where it's coming in to either do strafing or bombing. In this case, it'll be a strafing pass. As you can see, the high maneuverability of the jet at low altitude.
As we say in the fighter pilot trade, those kind of turns will roll your socks down in a hurry.
This is General Dynamics F-111. Now, 111's been around for a long time. It was built back in the McNamara era when we decided we need to have a multi-purpose, long-range fighter bomber.
In the early 60s.
That's correct. It's been around that long, and it's been a fine tactical fighter bomber during that period of time. The world's first swing-wing fighter.
What's the crew?
Well, it has a two-place crew, a pilot and a weapon system operator that sits the pilot on the left side of this thing, and on his right side by side, is the weapon systems operator. The aircraft is a multi-purpose airplane. It has lots of different roles that it flies, but the thing it does best is long-range, night interdiction. You may recall we used, when the raid in Libya was held, it was the fighter that did the actual bombing because it had the long-range special weapons capability, be able to take in these highly precise weapons over an extremely long distance.
Yeah, they flew that airplane nonstop from England, from the bases in England all the way to Libya and return. A lot of mid-air refuelings, but that was a long mission for those pilots. It's a huge airplane. Empty weight's about 50,000 pounds plus. Fully loaded, it goes up over 100,000 pounds. That's bigger than the old B-17s that flew in World War II.
This airplane fills that role. It does as far as a tactical fighter bomber, it's been around longer than any other tactical fighter bomber in the inventory, and we don't have anything to replace it.
Yeah, like the old B-52 that's still flying, this airplane, there are a lot of these pilots that are younger than the airplanes they're flying, I
A lot
imagine.
of them, you bet. It was ahead of its time. Now, it was, at one time, the idea of Secretary McNamara that this airplane would be the backbone for the fighter bomber force for all the services.
Right.
I can recall back 20, 25 years ago when that was going on, that there was a decision made because it was such a large aircraft not to put it on board the carriers. But basically, it's been a remarkable airplane. But if you look at that, it's one of the strangest looking things, because if you look at those outboard tanks, they're cocked, not cocked crooked. If you look at this airplane as it's taking off, look at those outboard tanks. The reason for that is as the wings swing, the tanks line up. It has basically the strike package. It's a strike package leader. If you're going to have somebody go in and put a lot of heavy iron on someone over a long distance, this is the aircraft you pick.
Here we come in now for the in-flight refueling. We're looking at the bottom of the refueling boom of a KC-135 Stratotanker, and this is from the boom operator's position. As we see, the pilot flies in right underneath, and the boom operator hooks her up and fills her up in flight. It's an amazing machine. Here we go, just hooking up right now.
Yeah, that's called a probe type of refueling. And what the pilot just did was flew right up to the boom, put that boom right in front of him, just outside the cockpit, and let the boom operator fly the boom around the cockpit. The 111 also has a remarkable capability for dash speed. It's a supersonic low-altitude dash airplane. It's one of the few airplanes we have that can go very, very fast at very low altitude. And having tried to intercept one of these airplanes going about Mach 1.5 at 100 feet across the Nevada desert, you better do it right or you won't catch one.
Yeah, I imagine.
You have to start a long way out and way ahead of them to catch them.
Why would you want a swing wing on an airplane?
Well, that's a good question. If you have the wing straight out, that gives you a good cruise configuration. It's the best gas mileage you can get at subsonic speeds. But as you go faster, it's desired to swing those wings back. Aerodynamically, that means you have less drag, and makes the aircraft maneuver better at high speed. We had the Iraqi oil pumps being taken out by this aircraft, and the reason for that is it has capability with the special weapons, very highly accurate weapons. It can go in at night and do it without being as threatened as it would in the daytime.
And those smart bombs, they were guiding them right in through the TV camera.
As you can see, coming into landing, he's got his wings full out.
Right spot's the landing light.
Now, it's got a nice slow approach and touchdown, very well controlled. As you can see, and that allows the airplane to be flown at good slow speed so they can stop it very easily.
Gary, here we go with the old F-4, the old workhorse from the Vietnam War, the old Phantom. It was a Navy and an Air Force aircraft, and of course was the fighter that we used predominantly in the Vietnam era. And you got lots of time in this airplane, don't you?
I got some time in the C model, you bet.
Tell us about it.
Well, what we see here is not really a C model. It's basically a converted E model aircraft, which is a follow-on to the C. That's converted to the Wild Weasel mission, which is what is going on in Iraq right now.
What's the Wild Weasel?
Well, the Weasel is the guys that the rest of the fighter community like to see come around, because what they do, they have special sensing equipment to pick up the ground radars. And as radars come up to try to track the other fighters and lock on you to try to fire a missile at you, the Weasels pick that up. Then they fire an anti-radiation missile right down into the radar dish that's trying to track you. Mm-hmm. So it's basically their mission in Vietnam and even today in Iraq is to suppress the enemy air defenses.
The Phantom has a two-place airplane. It's tandem. In other words, the two crew is sitting behind one another. The pilot of the aircraft sits in the front seat. The radar operator, bombardier, WISO we call it, the weapon system operator, is in the back seat of this airplane. And you can see from the back seat you really don't have much visibility. Though he can help you look around a little bit for incoming air-to-air threats. primarily his job is the weapon system operation. So he would control the Weasel and would also...
If you look on these aircraft that are taxiing out there, there is a missile on the wing station there.
Yeah.
That's an anti-radiation missile. Then that's what that guy in the back seat does. He's basically a sensor operator. Identifies where those radars are transmitting, locks onto those radars, and delivers a little, hello message to them, coming right. That basically goes right down the radar signal and destroys the radar antenna.
Right. It's got two engines on it. The J-79, which is an old jet engine. Of course, the airplane's old, and they haven't changed the engine, though they've updated it so it doesn't make so much smoke.
General Electric J-79, it's a venerable engine, but was a very, very well-built engine. The J-79, you could run it from idle to full afterburner and just slam it in there, and it would not even cough to you.
In Desert Storm, we've got a lot of what they call the smart weapons, these high-tech weapons, which are either laser-guided or optically guided to the target, and this is a good sequence. Explain what's happening here, Gary.
Well, this is an optically guided weapon. As you can see, it has in the face, there's a little glass place for an open area where they can see with a TV camera out, and that's what you see here. It's not free fall. It's been powered and thrusted, so it has a thruster in the back like a little rocket motor and goes right into its target.
It's a huge airplane. I've never flown one in an actual flight, but I have been in the simulator of the B-52, and it was some experience for an old fighter pilot to get in that big thing.
How'd you get your hand out?
You're right. It has 8 engines in this airplane. They've got a newer version of I believe it's the G's and H's, which have the turbofan engines, but the older versions of the B-52, which originally started out in the 1950s. So a lot of these airplanes literally are older than the pilots that are flying them. Of course, we're using them for carpet bombing, saturation bombing from high altitude. They've got a complement of crew, weapon system operators, a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and all of those are on board. They're flying with an internal bomb load. The bombs on the B-52 are carried in the internal bomb bays, but it can also carry air-launched cruise missiles, which are underneath the wings. I don't think we've used it in that mode at Desert Storm yet, but it certainly is doing the carpet bombing and softening up the supply lines and the petroleum storage, the fuel storage, the ammunition storage, and everything that's associated with a ground army. This is a tremendous airplane. You can imagine it's intercontinental. It was designed for strategic bombing, and it has extremely long range, but it still has a air-to-air refueling capability.
Charlie, what can you do to compare the difference between the F-111 and the B-52 as far as their types of missions that they would be used for in Iraq?
Well, the F-111, of course, probably comes in low altitude, high speed, and makes sort of a dash in and to a very strategic target with its smart weapons, fires for instance, on the oil field pumping station or the communications facility for the Iraqi command and control structure, whereas the B-52's been used primarily for the carpet bombing. In other words, they come over straight and level at a sort of a medium speed, high altitude. They pick up their target, which might be a fuel storage dump or ammunition storage or a troop concentration, and they just start laying down a string of bombs. Gary, we've seen some exciting footage in this last 45 minutes. We've seen the newest airplanes in our inventory, and we've seen some of the oldest airplanes in our inventory. And yet every one of them are doing a bang-up job over there. It's just been fantastic of the successes that we have seen. And I just want to give all of the guys and gals over there a big attaboy for the job they're doing for us in Desert Storm.
Well, you know, it's unfortunate that it's needed, but quite frankly, our folks are doing a marvelous job. It takes training, it takes good equipment, and it takes planning for something of this nature to be successful. And it takes extremely proud people flying those airplanes and maintaining those airplanes to make that happen. So I'll take my hat off to them, too. They're doing a fine job. It's the kind of thing that many of us really want to say that I'd like to be there to be shaking each one of them's hand.
Yeah. A big salute to all of the pilots, all of the crews, all the maintenance people in Desert Storm.